I wasn't a believer in anything supernatural. At least, that's what I told myself. I was always skeptical about things like Ouija boards, ghosts, and all the stories people shared around campfires. That was until the night I played with the Ouija board. I still wish I could erase it from my memory, but I can't, and I'm here to tell you why. It was a regular Friday night, the kind where we were all just hanging out at my friend Emma's place. Her parents were away, so the usual crowd of high school kids gathered in her basement, trying to make the best of a boring evening. As the hours wore on, the conversation drifted from the usual topics, boys, school gossip, towards something a little darker. One of the guys, Tom, brought out an old Ouija board. I don't even know why he had it. I'd seen one at a thrift store before, gathering dust on a shelf, with its ominous lettering and the yes and no sections that felt more like a mockery of something dangerous. When he put it down on the coffee table, I wasn't sure whether to laugh it off or just ignore it. But, to my surprise, a few of my friends seemed interested. Emma, being the host, was the first to suggest we play. "It's just a game," she said. "Come on, don't be scared." I reluctantly agreed, mainly because I didn't want to look like a coward in front of everyone. But deep down, something told me that this was a mistake. Still, I shrugged it off. What's the worst that could happen? We dimmed the lights, and the atmosphere grew colder, despite the warmth in the basement. The room filled with a sense of nervous excitement. Emma set the planchette on the board and asked the first question, almost as if rehearsed. "Is anyone here with us?" For a while, nothing happened. The planchette sat still. I couldn't help but think this was all just a stupid joke. But then it moved. I don't know how to explain it. One second it was stationary, and the next it slowly slid toward yes. I remember looking around at everyone else, trying to gauge their reactions. None of us had touched it. No one was even near it, but it kept gliding across the board. And I could feel my heart start to race. Emma then asked, "Who are you?" I was sure this was just some trick, someone subtly pushing the planchette to get a reaction. But when it slowly moved toward the letters, it spelled out one word: Father. The room went completely silent. Tom and I exchanged nervous glances. "That's just random," I muttered, trying to shake off the growing unease. But Emma seemed transfixed, as if she'd just received some kind of sign. Then things took a turn. She asked another question. "What do you want?" The planchette moved again, but this time, it didn't just spell out a word. It spelled out help. At that point, I felt an icy chill spread through my body. I could see the others were starting to get nervous, too. Everyone was tense, like we were caught in a moment that was much heavier than any of us had expected. I stood up, ready to walk away, but then something happened that I'll never forget. As I moved to leave, the lights flickered, once, twice, then they went out completely. The basement was plunged into darkness, and for a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. Then came the sound of something scraping across the floor. It wasn't the planchette, this was something heavier. The noise echoed, unnatural and disturbing, and it felt like it was getting closer. Did anyone hear that? I asked, my voice trembling. No one answered. They were all too terrified to speak. Suddenly, the lights snapped back on, and the room felt colder than ever. I looked down at the Ouija board again. The planchette was gone. It had vanished. I can still see it, the empty space where it had been, the eerie quiet that filled the room. Everyone was looking around, trying to make sense of it. But then something strange happened. The planchette slowly slid back onto the board, as if it had never been gone. But this time, it didn't rest on any letter. Instead, it pointed directly at the word goodbye. That's when we all freaked out. Emma screamed, and the rest of us scrambled to our feet. We didn't even think to ask any more questions. We were too terrified to even touch the board again. Without saying a word, we bolted out of the basement and into the safety of the kitchen. But the strangest part came later. When I got home that night, I felt a presence, something I couldn't explain. It was like I wasn't alone. The air felt thick, like it was pressing against me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. It was just my imagination, I told myself. But then the whispers started. I'd hear my name, softly, almost like a breath. I'd turn around, but there was no one there. I'd be lying in bed, and in the middle of the night, I'd feel a cold hand brush across my shoulder. I'd wake up, drenched in sweat, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape that sensation of being watched. The thing is, it didn't just happen to me. A few of my friends started experiencing the same thing. Emma couldn't sleep for weeks, and Tom said he kept hearing scratching noises outside his window, even though no one was there. It wasn't until we all started talking that we realized it wasn't just a game. Something had followed us from that basement. And the worst part, I think it's still with me. Because every time I close my eyes, I feel it, like a shadow lurking in the corner of my mind, waiting. So, next time someone asks you to play with a Ouija board, just say no. Trust me, you don't know what you're inviting in. I wasn't expecting anything unusual to happen that weekend. My friends and I had plans to hang out at my place. My parents were out of town, and we had the whole house to ourselves. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were bored out of our minds, scrolling through our phones, playing cards, and tossing around random ideas. Then Lucas, who always had a thing for weird, unsettling stuff, mentioned he had an old Ouija board. We were all hesitant, but he swore that it was just a game and nothing more. You've all seen those dumb horror movies, he laughed. It's just a piece of cardboard with some letters on it. Nothing's going to happen. I'd never used one before. To be honest, I thought the whole idea was kind of dumb. But there was something about the way Lucas said it, like he was trying to prove something to us. The more we argued against it, the more he pushed. Eventually we gave in. We made our way up to the attic to get the board. The attic in my house was old, cramped, and rarely used. Just piles of old furniture, boxes of stuff my parents had kept for decades, and an old carpet that smelled like mothballs. When we got up there, Lucas pulled out the board, and I instantly felt a little uncomfortable. It was worn out, the edges curled up, and the planchette looked like it had seen better days. But Lucas was already setting it up, grinning like he'd won some kind of prize. We all sat around the board, nervously laughing, trying to convince ourselves that it was all just a joke. "Okay, let's get this over with," said Katie, as she placed her fingers lightly on the planchette. The rest of us followed suit, each of us barely touching the edge of it, like we were afraid it might move on its own. "Is anyone here with us?" Lucas asked, his voice mocking. It was a question everyone always asked when they started. He waited for a moment, and nothing happened. We all exchanged looks, trying to hide the uneasy feeling creeping up our spines. Then it happened. The planchette began to move. At first, it was slow, like it was gliding gently across the board, as if someone was lightly pushing it. None of us had touched it, and it wasn't Katie, whose fingers were barely brushing it. It moved toward yes. We all stared at it in disbelief. It's just a draft, I said quickly, trying to dismiss it, but my voice faltered. The room was still, and the air felt thick, colder than it had been before. Lucas asked again, more serious this time. "Who are you?" The planchette moved again, but this time it spelled out a name. "Melissa." There was a long pause. We looked at each other in confusion. None of us knew anyone named Melissa. Lucas laughed nervously. "That's weird." "Okay, whatever. Melissa, what do you want?" The planchette didn't waste any time. It quickly moved to the word, "Leave." At that moment, the temperature in the attic dropped. I could see my breath in the air. It wasn't just cold, it was an oppressive cold, like it was coming from somewhere deep, somewhere wrong. "All right, that's enough," I said, my voice suddenly shaky. "I don't care if this is real or fake. I don't want any part of it." I tried to stand up, but as soon as I moved, I heard something behind me. It was the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was one of my friends messing around, but the footsteps were too slow, too deliberate. They weren't coming from any of us. The sound echoed in the attic, like someone was walking around us, just out of sight. I froze. We all froze. No one said anything. The air felt too thick to breathe. Then the planchette started moving again, but this time it didn't spell anything. It just moved, faster, jerky, as though someone or something was pushing it across the board with force. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, closer. I could feel something creeping up behind me, something heavy. It was in the room with us. We were all paralyzed, too scared to move or even speak. And then the footsteps stopped. I heard a whisper, so faint, so soft, it almost felt like it was inside my head. But it wasn't in my head. It was real. "Leave now." That was the moment I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed. I don't even remember what I said, but I ran for the stairs, pushing my friends ahead of me, shoving them out of the attic. We didn't look back, didn't even bother to close the door. We rushed out of the house and into the front yard, panting, scared out of our minds. We stood there for a few moments, trying to catch our breath, but all of us were too shaken to speak. That night, when I finally managed to go back inside, everything felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I went to bed, trying to forget everything that had happened, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Melissa in the shadows, just beyond the edge of my vision. The worst part? The dreams. Every night after that, I had the same nightmare. I'd be back in the attic, surrounded by my friends, the board in front of us. But no matter what I did, I couldn't leave. The footsteps would always get closer, and the whisper would return, saying the same thing over and over. "Leave, now." It's been months since that night. I haven't touched a Ouija board again, and I won't. But the dreams still come. And sometimes when I wake up, I could swear I hear those footsteps again, slowly walking down the hallway toward my room. I know I'm not alone. And that name, Melissa, it's still out there waiting. So if you ever find yourself alone in an attic, staring at an old Ouija board, just remember this story. You don't know who or what you might invite in, and you never know if there's a Melissa out there looking for you. It was a chilly autumn evening when my friends and I decided to gather for a night in. Halloween was just around the corner, and we were looking for something to spice up our typical movie marathon. That's when Nicole, the adventurous one of the group, suggested we try using a Ouija board. I felt a shiver run down my spine at the mention of it. I'd heard stories, people claiming to have had strange experiences, things they couldn't explain. But Nicole was persuasive, and after some back and forth, I agreed, albeit reluctantly. We dug out an old Ouija board that my grandmother had kept in a dusty corner of her attic. It looked ancient, with the letters slightly faded and the planchette worn. I couldn't shake the feeling that it held a history, one that was best left alone. But as we set up in my dimly lit living room, excitement buzzed in the air. The lights flickered as we arranged ourselves in a circle. With hands trembling, we placed our fingers on the planchette. I could feel my heart racing as we all took a collective breath. "Is there anyone here with us?" Nicole asked, her voice breaking the silence. At first, nothing happened. We laughed nervously, trying to shake off the tension. But then the planchette moved, slowly at first, then with purpose. It slid across the board, spelling out yes. A chill swept over me. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The planchette moved again, spelling John. I glanced at the others, trying to gauge their reactions. "John?" I didn't recognize the name, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "Why are you here?" Nathan asked. The planchette hesitated before sliding to spell danger. "What kind of danger?" I asked, my voice trembling. The planchette jerked and spelled, "You." That sent a wave of fear coursing through me. My gut instinct screamed for us to stop, but curiosity held me captive. We asked more questions, each answer more chilling than the last. "Why are you warning us? What do you want?" The responses grew increasingly ominous, warning us to leave and to beware. As we delved deeper, the atmosphere shifted. The lights flickered more violently, and the temperature in the room dropped. I could see my breath misting in the air. An eerie tension filled the space, and I felt a prickle of fear crawling up my spine. Suddenly, the planchette shot across the board, stopping at run. Panic ignited within me. "Maybe we should stop," I suggested, but the others were too caught up in the thrill. "Let's ask one last question," Nicole said, her voice barely steady. "What will happen if we don't leave?" The planchette moved, spelling out time. Before I could process what that meant, the lights went out completely. We were plunged into darkness. The only sound was our collective breathing. I felt a weight pressing down on me, as if the very air had thickened. Then came the whispers. Soft, insistent murmurs like distant voices calling from the shadows. "Leave. Now." My heart raced as I turned to my friends, their faces pale with fear. "This isn't funny anymore," I shouted, but the whispers grew louder, drowning out my words. Suddenly, I saw a figure in the corner of the room, a shadow darker than the night itself. It flickered, barely visible, but it felt like it was staring right at me. "What do you want?" I screamed, but no one answered. The planchette began to move erratically, darting across the board. I felt a force pulling at my fingers, holding me in place. "Let go!" I yelled, but it felt as though something was fighting against me. In a burst of adrenaline, I pulled my hands away, and as soon as I did, the lights flickered back on. The figure was gone, but the atmosphere felt heavy, charged with a palpable energy. "Did you see that?" Nathan gasped, his eyes wide. We all nodded, frozen in shock. We scrambled to our feet, and I rushed to the door, throwing it open. We burst outside, gasping for fresh air. The cool night breeze felt like a welcome relief against the terror that had gripped us. In the days that followed, the events haunted me. Nicole reported hearing the whispers every night, shadows flitting just beyond her vision. Nathan moved away, claiming he could feel an unseen presence watching him. I began to notice strange things in my home. Objects misplaced, lights flickering, and that lingering chill in the air that never quite dissipated. The most chilling thing, however, was the lingering sense of dread. It felt like we had stirred something we couldn't put back to rest. I never touched that Ouija board again, nor did I allow it back into my home. To this day, I wonder about John and the danger he warned us about. I'm left with the feeling that whatever we encountered that night is still out there, watching, waiting. And sometimes, when the wind howls just right, I can still hear the whispers in the dark, echoing the warning we should have heeded.